for my Steelers. And that's what I really wanted to get into today because, part of the reason I became a Steelers fan because it came down to Pittsburgh and San Francisco. Both cultures I love. I think both have tremendous ownerships. Both have outstanding fan bases. Both draft well. Both have a history of winning. Like, okay, I can't really lose one way or the other. But I'm like, you know what? I can't really describe it, folks. But you know that feeling you get when you think about your favorite team? For me, again, Red Sox, Vols, Warriors. It's just that feeling. You're like, this just feels right. This just feels like me. I feel like a team that can honestly be a representation of who you are as a person. It certainly is a representation of what a city is like. LA is glitz and glamour. LA teams tend to be kind of flashy. Boston is very smart. They're very stubborn at times. They are gritty. That's Boston. Their teams tend to do that. Red Sox, Celtics, Patriots, etc. Miami. Great in hot weather, terrible in cold weather. That's Miami. And Pittsburgh is a city full of hardworking, blue-collar people who believe in nothing good comes out, or you don't get anything good unless it's from hard work. Like that's a great like American value. And the Steelers, for the vast majority of their history, have kind of embodied that. It's time for an identity shift in Pittsburgh. It is. I had an epiphany last night. Or really this morning, at least when I woke up from last night. I'm thinking, okay, time out. So I have been complaining, I'm certainly not alone in this, about Matt Canada as the OC of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That, man, Pittsburgh's got to move on from Matt Canada. And they certainly do. I don't move off that position for a second. He was, again, awful yesterday. I mean, the Steelers, how about this stat, folks? The Pittsburgh Steelers have now gone 55 straight games without hitting 400 yards of offense. That is now the fifth longest streak in the history of the National Football League. But I was thinking about, okay, we know Matt Canada's a problem, and we know that there are some limitations to Kenny Pickett. While I still like him, there are clear limitations. O-line's not great, but it can be improved upon. Like there are some correctable issues in Pittsburgh. Why am I not giving more heat to the guy who is the reason that all of these individuals are there, particularly the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, and that's Mike Tomlin? Now, Mike Tomlin, there's nothing to take. If he retired tomorrow, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He is you could argue he might be the greatest coach in Steelers history, and that's saying a lot. Chuck Noll Chuck Noll won 4 Super Bowls. I mean, it's led one of the greatest dynasties in the history of the league. Chuck Noll's probably still at the top, but it's Tomlin or Cowher for that number 2 spot. Nothing takes away from that, what he's done. But I was thinking about, okay, Mike Tomlin, he's been a successful head coach, but the whole, we touted this, I've touted this in the past, that, hey, Mike Tomlin never had a losing season. That's like the equivalent of saying, the Academy gives me 1 vote as an Oscar nominee every year. Well, it means I'm consistent. It means I'm always good. It means I'm always in good movies and evidently do a good enough job to at least get 1 vote. But I'd rather be Meryl Streep, Daniel Day-Lewis, and Denzel Washington, where every 3rd, 4th year they get a nomination and every decade they get a win. Much rather be in that position. Think about the 49ers, for example. They went through a stretch where they, for lack of a better term, sucked. And I do mean sucked. Yeah, but they got it right. They rebuilt. You know who have had losing seasons? Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. Other sports, Eric Spoelstra, I believe, has had a losing season. Steve Kerr's had a losing season. That shouldn't be a death blow. Again, to me, what that does, and the new standard in Pittsburgh for the last decade, and certainly the last half decade, has been, let's just be good enough. Let's be competent. Let's always make sure we're in the mix. Well, sometimes you need to be out of the mix to see where you're at so that you're able to see how to get back in the mix. As I always say, I repeat this phrase a lot on my show, that the worst place to be in sports is in the middle. We're not good enough to compete. We are not bad enough to tank. What do? Best place to be in sports is at the top, competing for championships like the Chiefs and the Bengals and the Niners and the Cowboys and the Eagles and the Ravens and Jaguars. That's where you want to be. And then after that, I mean, is it a terrible thing to be the Bears, the Cardinals, the Panthers, the Texans? Texans have been good this year, but for the last half decade, they mostly have sucked. Is it an awful thing to be there? Okay, we need to make a move at head coach. We need a quarterback. We need a roster overhaul. But if we do those things, maybe we can get to the level of these contending teams in our conference or in the league in general. I feel like Kenny Pickett, Matt Canada's bad. At this point, I've come to terms with, I've accepted who Matt Canada is. He's uncreative. He's easy to game plan against, and he doesn't take big risks. He just doesn't. Kenny Pickett, and again, I've said Kenny is a guy that if he hits the ceiling, I think he can give you the production of a Kirk Cousins. He's not as similar to Kirk stylistically, but from a production standpoint, if Kenny hits his ceiling, he can be Kirk Cousins. But is that going to win a Super Bowl in Pittsburgh? Is playing 2005 football, relying on your defense and your running game, is that going to win the Super Bowl? Is that going to contend for Super Bowls? I could have sworn that given the fact that the Steelers are, tied for the most championships ever, that I think that would be the standard. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe Mike Tomlin is okay with just being good enough. Mike Tomlin often says, the standard is the standard, which I think is a great quote. The standard is the standard. Well, now Mike has me questioning, what is the standard? You have Tomlin, you have Deontay Johnson, you have the freaking kicker, Chris Boswell, complaining about the officials. And were the officials perfect yesterday? Not even close. There were some awful calls that either went against Pittsburgh or that they didn't call against Jacksonville. But that's not the way they lost the game. They lost because Jacksonville is Trevor Lawrence and Pittsburgh is Kenny Pickett. There's nothing wrong with Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett is a starting quarterback in the NFL, especially. Do I think Kenny would be better if he had Reed, Shanahan, McVay? Certainly. Of course he'd be better. Every quarterback is better in those systems. But do we think that he would be to the level of, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, two guys who are in his division? No. Arm talent, Accuracy comes and goes. Pocket awareness, Mobility, yes, but he's not close to the athlete Lamar Jackson is. Then again, who is? He doesn't have the pocket presence that Joe Burrow has. Leadership's there, but leadership has been there with backup quarterbacks in the past. Leadership there is there with Tyrod Taylor. I don't think anybody in New York thinks that Tyrod Taylor, with all due respect to him, and God bless him, he's out of the hospital after yesterday's game. I don't think anybody in New York thinks Tyrod Taylor is the answer to winning Super Bowls again in the Meadowlands. I think it's time for Pittsburgh to kind of come to terms with, this is what we are, and are we going to stick with this? Are we going to change our identity into what the league is now, which is and I've been saying this for 2 years, a quarterbacks league? This isn't we hear all the time, defense wins championships. No, it doesn't. It does not. Quarterbacks win championships. You need a great defense, or at least bare minimum, a very good defense to succeed. See almost all of Tom Brady's Super Bowls. Just about all of them, he had a great defense, even the recent ones when he was more of the driving force behind the Patriots winning those Super Bowls. Patrick Mahomes has had excellent defenses. Matthew Stafford, Eli Manning. Again, looking more at the modern times, you think about guys like what's his name? Nick Foles. He's had excellent defenses around him. But you need the quarterback, and you need the quarterback to play well, and you need an offensive system that will help the quarterback play well, and preferably you'd like an offensive system that helps a tremendously talented quarterback play well. And the way the rules have dictated play in the NFL the last couple of years, last 2, 3, 4 years, really since Mahomes kind of entered the league as a starter and started winning MVPs and Super Bowls, that's kind of when the identity of the league has changed. Whether or not Pittsburgh will choose to adapt, it's up to them. Do I think they can? Do I think they're smart enough to? No question about it. Do I think the fans recognize that? I think so. At least from what I've seen on Pittsburgh Steelers social media. It's time for an identity shift. It's time to look yourself in the mirror if you're Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers and say, forget the roster, because for the record, I think the roster is top 10 in the NFL. You see George Pickens hurdle 2 guys yesterday? Deontay Johnson, while he didn't play well yesterday, is capable of being a solid 2 in the league. Najee Harris is the 1,000-yard back. Jalen Warren is an excellent gadget guy you can use, as is Calvin Austin. They just so happen to have, in my view, the best defensive player in football on their side of the ball in TJ Watt. Joey Porter's been a tremendous rookie. You've got Alex Highsmith, who's a double-digit sack guy. It isn't like they're devoid of talent. They're not New England, where New England refuses to change their identity and they can't draft. No, Pittsburgh can draft. Pittsburgh drafts as well as anybody in football. But the identity needs to change. Whether or not they'll do that remains to be seen. It's time to look yourself in the mirror, Mike Tomlin. Steelers ownership, Steelers upper management. This brand of football, forget the roster. This brand of football does not compete for Super Bowls. And last time I checked, I thought the standard was being 6-time Super Bowl champions. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see if they adapt. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.